Racine has become impervious to success, and that's the barrier to it. It's right in the zoning and the regulations and the bureaucracy, and that's all covered up by blaming it on other communities. It's really Sturtevant and Mount Pleasant and Caledonia that's their responsibility.
Good morning, Racine. Welcome back to Talking About You. George Myers, I see you're here again today.
Yeah, I've made it again. Look out, folks.
Jim Spotted is still producing this. It gives me something to do on a weekly basis. I'm Dr. Ken Yorgan, your host. And man, oh man, have things gotten... I don't think they've gotten anywhere, have they?
No, actually got worse.
Man, oh man, are we stationary or what?
Well,
have we shown ourselves impervious to success or what?
Oh, we certainly have. Look at that there. See the headline there? Racine ranked second worst
in the country.
Yeah, in the whole nation.
You know what? Just as a side, and then we'll get back to the topic. Do you realize the top two cities are both in Wisconsin? You know what the number one ranked is?
Well,
Milwaukee.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, Milwaukee, West Dallas. Yeah.
Well, what got us started off on this little particular rant today was the mayor's response to this here, that Racine is ranked second worst for blacks in the nation. And so he wrote an editorial, and we're going to pick it apart a little bit.
What were some of the problems? Do we know how we were measured second worst?
Well, there was some of the things that they used to measure it was median income for blacks.
Yeah,
was down, and the median. It's kind of deceptive, really, the median income, because that means halfway between the highest and the lowest income.
If you took everybody on a list, from the wealthiest person and put them all on a great big long list down to the poorest person, and the person in the middle.
Right in the middle.
It's not average. Nothing about average.
No,
it's just that's the median. That's the middle.
And so it's below the national average. I mean, it is a problem. And
it is.
We have, but really these statistics, I don't know if they really dug in far enough. I mean, they do this ranking, and I'm not sure they go far enough into the real numbers to why there's the rankings are what they are. But I mean, it comes up in the headlines. It does show. It gives us a bad mark.
Well, apparently it was embarrassing for the mayor. I mean,
we were third and we went to second. So
yeah.
I mean, under his, and I remember him campaigning, we're the third.
That was the thing. Yeah, he was going to get all that handled. He's got his attention on it.
He went the other direction. So
yeah. Presumably, if you would have done absolutely nothing at all, it would have stayed the same.
Yeah,
the other was long-term wealth. I think that was the
home ownership. Was
I mean it's 30.6%.
The incarceration rate probably impacts it too. I'm certain that does. And the incarceration rates for African Americans in this area is terrible.
Yeah, too darn much money. We can afford to jail people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, somebody's making money on people being jailed, and there's a lot of people that, in my opinion, would be better off not in jail. So
I finally heard a mention of that, a trunk line between the schools and jail. Getting right out of school, getting ready for jail. Sometimes I look at them, worried about the kids. Yeah, what are you worried about the kids for? Well,
same thing with the military.
When they grow up, we have to get them. Somebody's got to fill the jails.
The military is just one step from putting them into the military. That's the other line, Yeah. So I mean, really, there's a cycle here that needs to get broken.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, apparently it's not breaking around here.
No, but the mayor's got some answers, right?
Well, I don't know.
No answers.
One of the responsibilities is that the surrounding villages, like Caledonia, Mount Pleasant, Wind Point, Elmwood Park, Sturtevant, if they do not own the role that they play and take responsibility for it, we will continue to be a community where if you're poor and a person of color, the only place you can likely afford to live will be the city of Racine. Well, he's like, I don't know, blaming the suburbs for having
no, that's what it says right after that. If you are white and have money, you will likely live in Sturtevant or Mount Pleasant. But he mentions that that it is the responsibility of the surrounding villages. Do not take this seriously. If they do not own the role they play and take responsibility for it, in other words, they have a responsibility for the conditions in Racine.
All right, he goes to that stretch. Where was that before? And how is it, I guess I look at it and say, how is it their responsibility?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
You know?
It's not their, that's like blaming the person next door because my house is a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I got laundry in the basement. It's my neighbor's fault.
You know, I think he's
That
deflecting.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think he's deflecting the fact that, you know, I don't think he knows
You've been
what
living
to
that
do.
way too, huh, Doc?
Yeah.
No, I mean, but that's essentially what it's saying. He said right here, I cannot stress this enough. The City of Racine cannot fix a county-wide or regional problem on our own. No, you can't do that on our own, but we're not talking about doing that. We're talking about fixing Racine.
Yeah.
Well, here's something that he identified. Decades of redlining and other policies have left African Americans out of home ownership, job opportunities, and economic prosperity. I don't know
How
that there's
long did that go?
redlining in this community
No.
anymore.
That goes back decades.
Well, wait a sec. You have to remember, there was when the mortgages were made, they were a lot of home ownership. Matter of fact, I remember the City of Racine actually uptick in home ownership. You know, after the crisis and the mortgage fallout, again, it went back down. But
You're talking about the late 1990s?
yeah, no, the late 2000, yeah, 2004.
2008 was the crash.
Yeah, before,
Just
the,
before
crash.
the crash?
I mean, there was a lot of home. I mean, listen, there was no redlining. If you could breathe, you were getting a loan.
No, I haven't. Yeah,
No.
the redlining is hard.
Yeah.
Even if you couldn't breathe, they would put your name
Well,
on the paper.
Well,
That's just a tactic used to say this is bad, this is real bad. We got to. I don't like the way.
that's a false.
This whole editorial
lie,
went.
blame.
You know, we're oh woe is me. Well,
Well, I think there are problems. I definitely think that the African American community suffers some discrimination in this.
yeah, I'm
in
not
this
saying
town.
they don't, but what I'm saying is the mayor here is, you know, he's
He's
changed his
identifying
whole
the wrong
budget.
things,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're changing his whole budget to address landlords, to address, you know, all the home ownership and all the rest, and it's because of this decades of redlining. No, I don't think there was the decades of redlining. I think it was the decades of poor education that he doesn't mention in here is the unified school system, which
Well-
we've had poor education in this community.
That's very true, and that is a serious problem. But that's still outside the ranks of the city. All right. Now, but when you get down to the city itself, what is the mayor
What can the
responsible
city
for?
do? Yeah.
Well-
He says this analysis, which he's talking about of this ranking, only helps to reinforce arguments that I have been making. He's talking about himself, the mayor, since I first took office. Disparities between the city of Racine and our surrounding villages and towns are problematic, inequitable, and continue to grow. That hasn't got anything to do with our problems within the city and what we can do to resolve what is going on in the city with making it such a bad. I'm not saying it's a really horrible bad place. It's just the second worst in the country. Why can't we get that straightened out? And I just think there's ways to do it, even despite the lousy education. I think the city can do some things to make it easier.
Poverty and education go kind of hand in hand. Unemployment and
They do.
education and poverty go hand in hand.
Another thing that goes along with that is the family structure.
Yeah.
But so there's.
Well, here's what I'm going with this education thing. Corey brought this whole educational thing into his campaign, how he's going to address the education and the unified. He even he brought the voucher system into the tax bill, and he sent out how much money was
Oh,
spent.
yeah. He was going to.
So, I mean, he definitely
expose that.
exposed how this voucher system is robbing the public school system of their chance to educate and increase employment and all the other things that go along with a good education. But now, when it comes down to a problem, there's nothing in here about education. All of a sudden one of the things that you can do, and I'm not saying a voucher system is the answer, but it certainly is applying a little bit of pressure on the education system and how it's functioning, and we're at least taking a look at it. I like the idea that we've got, I don't want to call it competition, but I want to call it where we're visually looking at statistics now. And you got online schools. That's a whole other area that we haven't touched on.
Well, when the vouchers first came out, they first started in Milwaukee, remember? Mm-hmm. And there was one analysis that showed when the vouchers came out, guess what? The Milwaukee public schools started shaping up their act because they had suddenly some competition, and so their grades actually improved.
So, I mean, when you talk about poverty, I mean, it correlates to education. A better education gets you a better job, can lift you out of poverty. one of the things
That's
that
absolutely true.
in this budget, we talk about, he's going right after these landlords. It's the housing. Every study that's out there puts housing, almost at the bottom. It doesn't create poverty.
No.
You're in poverty. The housing could be poor because you don't have a decent job. Your education's poor. You don't understand basic living habits. that can put you there.
But it gives a mayor a false narrative in
Right.
showing that he's actually doing something about all this poverty and all
Right.
this. No, but that has nothing. Every 10 years, something like that comes out, and it's just a false target. Unfortunately, the housing is not causing it to be the second worst place for blacks. That is not
Right.
part of the problem.
But I
Like you
can
said,
go
it's
back.
always
But
at the
here's the
bottom of
thing.
list.
When I look at this and I kind of read between the lines, what I'm seeing is here. Listen, I'm doing my part in this. Sturtevant and Mount Pleasant and Caledonia, they're not doing their part. I'm doing my part to go after these landlords to straighten the system. Vote for me. I'm going to continue on. And I've seen this in the last 30 years. The Democratic rule in the city of Racine has really, as far as I'm concerned, been just going door to door, dragging black people to the vote for the Democratic Party.
Well, it's a
And I think
victimization
it is a
scheme is what it is. It's
victimization,
saying
and I
you're a
think this
victim
can-
and I'm going to
Right,
help.
and I'm
I'm going to
gonna
help
save
you
you.
out. Vote for me.
You know.
And then they go around and
it
make
could
it
be
opposite.
worse. It could be worse. The Republicans could be dragging them to the polls. And
Well,
But let's get back to education for just a second. I think one of the problems with a unified school district or any of these large school districts is there's too much central control. There's too much top-down control over what's going on in the classroom. Teachers are educated professionals, and they're not giving the latitude that they need in order to function effectively.
That's so true. They
You
know
talk to
how
them and
they know
they'll
how
tell
to
you
keep.
that, you know,
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
they-
good. I'm glad to hear that. I don't know why they're not screaming more about the administration, because as far as I'm concerned, they could just get rid of the whole administration. Keep the
What-
superintendent there and
The
a couple
nice thing
people.
about a centralized school district is purchasing power, for one thing.
Oh,
That
okay.
is one of the primary advantages.
That doesn't take a parking lot
You
full
buy
of
a ton of
employees
chalk,
to
you're going to
buy
get it cheaper
by
than
itself.
if you buy chalk in
Okay.
5-pound boxes, that kind of stuff. So there are advantages to having a centralized system.
But to have it set up so that directs what the teachers are supposed to be doing in the classroom is where you really get your false.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
you get a misdirection, and all of a sudden the teachers are no longer teaching things that are important to the students. They're teaching things that are important to the people in the administration.
Right.
We're picking up from the worldview, and all these kids have got to be good.
Well, teachers get disempowered. Teachers do. What do I call them? Teachers? Teachers get disempowered. They're not allowed to utilize what they have learned. They're not allowed to really let loose their creative expression
That's right.
of education.
You need to turn it over to the teachers, the education system. You let them teach it, and
You can't turn them into a rubber stamp.
No, you cannot. And not speaking for somebody in an office halfway across the city in a central area where they're sitting there at a desk, far distance from the student, figuring out what you need to tell that student. No, that's got to be the teacher. It's a one-on-one proposition, teaching.
And you cannot enforce excellence. Teachers are human beings just like everybody else. Some of them are going to be extraordinary. Some of them are going to be terrible. And what you do is hopefully the terrible ones eventually just kind of like,
You have to be able to get rid of them.
yeah,
You have to
they
be able to do
drift to
that.
the
And
side and they
unfortunately,
go into something else.
Yeah,
and-
unfortunately, the teachers, that's hard to
we
do.
don't have this educational base, which I think is like really the foundation to, if you want to get out of poverty, get a good education, you're
Very
going to get a
important.
job, and you can lift your way out of it. You've got a system here though now that, all right, I don't have a good education, I want to get a job. Now we know, and when you look at statistics over in the 70s, we had a good economy. You didn't have to have an education. You could almost be anybody could walk out and get a job. Those days are gone. Now you've got to come into the market, and the stagnation of wages at the lower end there's always been a lower end market of wages, and that I think has been stagnant for probably 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
But even if you raise it to $15 an hour, you're not going to alleviate poverty. You may offset a little bit of it, but I don't see that being the answer.
If you stopped education at the 3 R's, Just say, we're going to make sure people know how to read, write, and keep books and that type of stuff. And you turn a kid loose, and I'm not going to talk about guys more than girls. Girls seem to get through this education process better than guys do. Little boys need to get out and get to work soon. But if you just make sure they could do the 3 hours, and then you deregulate it so that anybody can start up a business, you'd be surprised how many of those kids, despite the fact that they hadn't learned about Shakespeare and a whole bunch of fancy things in school, they could get out there and they'll figure out a business, and they will do very well in that. And then when they get up in their 30s, maybe they decide, you know what I really want to be? I want to be a architectural engineer. And that's still plenty early enough to decide you're going to go back to school.
You know what? You have to, if you're going to, Corey wants to stay within the same envelope of safety and the program that he's put together for the last 30 years, that he acts like he has no idea what happened. Well, it was really...
That's probably true.
That's probably true. but you've got to, I don't want to use the word think out of the box. I don't like that term. But you have to really come at this differently. And I think you're right, George. We need plumbers. We need electricians. We need welders. We need a lot of individuals.
Jim, Jim's got a very interesting story about the guy, the car mechanic.
Yeah, he's a millionaire. He's a millionaire fixing cars.
And I drive by this place frequently. I didn't even know it till tonight.
Don't talk about him.
Little hole in the wall.
Don't talk about him. He's going to be on. My price will go up.
He's doing marvelously as a car mechanic.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that kid that's 12 years old and he thinks, you know what, the school's not... I got the 3 hours. I understand that. I'm not a genius. I'm not going to be a computer tech, but I can be a heck of a mechanic. And my dad's uncle is a mechanic. I can go work in a garage. I can go. I'm telling you, those are the areas that we need to really address poverty in this community. Maybe start some programs. And I'm a big believer in online school. Okay, you can go sit in front of this online school. We talked about this. What about churches doing it? Even for homeless, I want an education. Sit them down and let them do something.
Well, I'm sure there are churches that would love to have those programs, or maybe already do have those programs.
If you do it on a casual basis, it doesn't have to be a program. They have a computer and they get one in there. Or something
but you got to start thinking differently. You can't think the way we are. We continuously be this. We've been like this. Remember, guys. For 30 years, I've watched the city of Racine go downhill doing the same thing, dragging the same votes in to stay in office. You've done the same things over and over, and we're still where we are.
Well, Jim, I would say, instead of a new way to think, I would say don't think. In other words, just let it go. Yeah. Just quit thinking about and planning how other people should do things. Just say, back the city off. Back the inspectors off, back all the permits off, all the rules and regulations of who gets to do what, and we're going to make sure that anybody that gets started up is going to be a success, picking the winners and losers. Quit thinking. Just get rid of it, go, and then sit back and watch the action. Because people will come up out of the nowhere,
Absolutely.
Out of the closets, out of the wherever, and they're going to start doing things.
That's how a community, that's how a community betters themselves, is by all people in the community working together.
That's where you're going to get
this separating, black people from Hispanic people to gay people. All this separation of people is not healthy for a community.
Well, and I know
we need to all work together.
And I still maintain that the biggest problem that blacks have has nothing to do with their innovations and their intelligence or anything like that. They're just not well connected. Yeah, when they go up to City Hall, they got 15 doors slammed already, as opposed to anybody else goes in and he's got at least a few opened, and it's a lot easier to get started.
Well, back to the budget.
Okay.
This new budget that came in. Now, when we talk about, he's going to, we have to bring people out of poverty. Now, it's not no longer City of Racine. It's Sturtevant, Mount Pleasant, North Bay, the whole works is involved in this. But your assessments...
What do you mean they're involved with this?
Well, he wants...
Corey Mason's involving him. Corey Mason is saying this is not a city problem. This is an area problem. This is a countywide problem. The City of Racine is a countywide problem.
Right. So, but if you look at this new budget, the water bills have gone up. That's a direct fee to persons that have, it's going to be directly affected to them. Right. Even the recycling. When they talk about landlords not paying for that. The person that's living there. So so what you're doing is directly taxing the persons you're supposedly trying to save to bring out.
And it gets worse. The more you regulate, and not just landlords, but particularly when you're regulating the residential properties, the harder it is to run them. And you see, and if you look at most of the boarded up houses you see out in the city are within the inner city.
What is the goal? Now they've taken in TIF 2 districts. They're going to suck money out of this, and they're going to.
Oh, I live in one of those.
I
Yeah,
know you
one
do.
of them.
And they're going to,
That's another thing that's not going to be a solution.
Right. I mean, what is the solution? I mean, what is their thoughts on this solution to this problem? I mean, it's obvious in his editorial. He's looking at like, well, wait a second here. You guys are all in us too. I come in with this great plan, but when I'm going to execute it, but now it's everybody's problem.
And
I can see
that's
what he's
just a
doing
false
politically.
target.
Well,
That's
he's been
right.
on a job for 2 years, and right here he says problems continue to grow. So,
Right.
I mean, what are you doing?
I mean, I guess there's what they're looking for, I think, is to have this, great community, beautiful homes, reasonably priced. I mean,
You can't reasonably price things in an area of regulation like that.
That doesn't work.
There's cities throughout the country that have proven that. San Francisco has got all these people homeless, and you can't build anything in San Francisco anymore because there's too many rules and regulations against it.
I think what the city wants to do is take this dollars from these TIFs. Let's go in. We're going to shape up these homes and we're going to sell them to owner occupied, which is great. It won't work. It just doesn't work.
There's a responsibility level. There's an income level.
And the fact is, they don't understand that giving a roof on a house here and there, I mean, you don't have enough money, and things deteriorate. You need pride of ownership, and that's the key. You have to build an excitement in the community. Now, I'm going to go into something that I thought about many times. If you really want to change Racine, you've got to be very different. Take the Bowl, Park High School, up by Uptown, that whole low area.
Oh, look out.
Back up the Root River, flood, I move the people out, pay them relocation, flood that area. You've now got an inner lake in the city of Racine. You've lost some housing, but you now created it. Take out a certain section of, I don't know, 4th District. There's a lot of older houses in there. I mean, literally take them out. You've got sewer and water. You go to developers. These lots are available. You can build on them. Take away the conditional use permit and let them come in there and start a business in the garage or an add-on or a barber shop on the front or a beauty parlor or whatever it happens to be.
Like a lakefront beauty parlor you talking about?
You could do all kinds of things. A coffee shop. You could do all kinds of things. I mean, cut those regulations and let it rip.
Yeah.
You've got nothing now. And it proves you've got nothing because they just announced you're the second worst for black people in the country. Let's change the way we operate and do things. And you know what? You can bring money in to do what you want to do. Why don't you bring money in to do what the community can really benefit from and incorporate that community? There's a million ideas.
But the thing that goes along with that, I don't know if you need to redo the Bowl or not, or down in the flats. We call it.
I know it's a wild one.
But the thing is, if you at least do the deregulation part of it, these things will spring up, and you got to get away from this idea that all the merchant business it has to be over in this place over here, and industrial over here, and people living have to be here. In fact. Right. Who was it talking about that Pick and Save has come up with where they have you have these libraries that go around. They have a little grocery store.
Oh, well, they just had that in the newspaper.
Yeah.
No, that's very clever.
Piggly Wiggly on wheels.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, back in, I mean, my friend of mine who grew up in Kenosha remembers when he was a kid, all the men leaving the house with their lunch buckets going over to American Motors. They walked to there because American Motors was built right in the middle of a residential area. You didn't separate this stuff out. It was all together, and people worked right next to the factory. They could walk to work.
It's exactly to what I just said a few minutes ago. You don't pre-punish people. And that's what this conditional use permit is. That's what all these regulations are about. Let people open up and expand and do things, create things that are some kind of business, some kind of an enterprise. If they do it wrong, if they harm somebody or if they endanger somebody, then you can come in.
Then you can come in.
And you know what?
That's right.
I mean, all of these people that we're paying to run around and do all of these inspections, I mean, do we really need that?
We don't. You know what? I was thinking about that.
Another segment of bureaucracy that why is the budget so high?
Because
all these inspections, I don't know if I mentioned on this program or not, but all these inspections, the only thing I've seen that really changed much was an alley cleanup. And I thought about that after that. You know what? If you wanted to have the inspectors go out, you could inspect cleanup. Yeah. And you know what? That would probably work, because that has worked. That's the only thing I've seen work. But when it comes to actual the buildings and that type of stuff, you've got to get away from that. You're just driving up the cost of housing. You're seeing boarded up houses now that cannot be rescued. It costs too much. You're talking, when you look at one of those boarded up houses, you're talking between somewhere in $20,000 and $50,000 to get it back on the market. And anybody that's got that much cash is not going to put it in to an old house in the inner city.
Well, and
which
they're
means you've
stifling
just lost
enterprise
more.
too. They're stifling
That's what I
enterprise.
mean.
Yeah. It's not
That's-
just home ownership that's being stifled by all these regulations and inspections and so on and so forth. It's any kind of enterprise.
Right. And when I'm talking about putting a house back on the market, I'm talking about more than just living there. I'm talking about someone who's going to be responsible for that building. And all I say to close out that part of it is, quit making landlords a scapegoat. They are not causing the problem.
Business owners of any kind, landlords are
They're
business owners.
That's right.
And all business owners are catching hell in this town.
Well,
you go around and talk to them.
Well, the vision. They got a vision in this town.
there's money available in this town.
the problem there might be,
Yeah.
but you have to be connected
Yeah.
too.
Well, I'm talking specifically things like the facade grants, where you can get $20,000 in a pop,
No.
to dress up the front of your building, if you know about it. If you can go and apply and have somebody walk that application through. Not everybody gets those grants.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes if something is out of the zoning thing, and you decide you're going to make a change, and in a business, you can actually work yourself right out of being able to do business there, because you are no longer grandfathered. You're now have to reapply for conditional use. And what's that conditional use permit up to? 800, 900?
Oh, yeah.
They got it way up
Oh,
there
is
now.
that high?
Oh yeah, it's way up there.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, increase it again.
800,
Yeah, and that's just the basic thing.
Yeah,
Any
that's
other
a start.
permits are going to be
There's
on
all
top of
kinds
that.
of signage requirements. There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really hard to make a change, because if you go too far, all of a sudden nothing's grandfathered anymore, and all of a sudden the sign has to come down in size, or the colors have to change, and it's a really ridiculous town to do business in. Like we said earlier in the program, Racine has become impervious to success, and that's the barrier to it. It's right in the zoning and the regulations and the bureaucracy, and that's all covered up by blaming it on other communities. It's really Sturtevant and Mount Pleasant and Caledonia that's their responsibility.
Well,
Believe that or not.
anyway, I guess you get the idea that we weren't big fans of the editorial that the mayor wrote. So take a look around town and see what you see. We think it's odd that this town always is screaming that it doesn't have enough money, and yet it's getting more money extracted out of the community, out of the people that live here, than any other city in the state.
Those other communities
on a
already
per
putting in
capita
$1.5 million every year.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, think about that, folks. And then the next time an election comes up, watch who you vote for. We're going to. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.